Angie sat across from me, silently sipping her morning coffee. After 3 amazingly passionate years, our morning chats have been routine for a few weeks now. Our romance seemed to have completely faded in recent weeks. The distance became an incredible challenge, turning us into just another couple from statistics. I'm sure the thick wall of cynicism I built around myself over the years also contributed to the destruction of our relationship, but I'll give Angie credit. She was still determined to help me deal with my problems. She was willing to listen to my dark story without judgment or objection, even now that our romance was ending. You always seem to return to your old self once you find peace with the world around you, don't you? Angie looked over her coffee mug. On her face, as if on a well-worn mask, a sad grimace froze. It's almost as if I'm writing a book, and just as I'm about to write the final chapters with "they lived happily ever after," well, I tried not to put the blame on her. She was completely innocent. I knew that she was trying to hold on to this love for as long as she could, and she knew that I was doing the same. But the distance became too much of a burden. And I come and add even more problems to you. She immediately took the blame for the fact that we moved away from each other. I wanted to take her hand and comfort her as best I could, but she pulled her hand away as if my hand had turned into a snake ready to bite. No, Dee, please no. Not everything can be your fault, honey. She looked at me, unshed tears in her eyes. Let me be the one to blame here, I beg you. No one is to blame here, Angie, I replied. You have not given me the slightest reason to hate you or even to tarnish your name. I slowly reached for my coffee mug. I liked the black elixir, as always. We both knew it was a big opportunity to take care of my career, and I was still a nomadic person. I've enjoyed every second I've spent with you, mio amore, but our lives have been pulling us in different directions since day one. Do you think we should spend this last weekend together? Her voice was dangerously close to breaking into tears. She lowered her head, as if standing before a judge who was about to sentence her. I would really like that, I replied. I still wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. Things like instinct and intuition were so confused in my mind that I was no longer sure which moral compass I was following. I hadn't slept well the last few nights, but the realization that I was returning to a life full of blood and bullets haunted me. As I drew closer to my dear home, not only did all fatigue disappear, but I began to shake with anticipation. This is how the world accepted me. It was in this environment that I felt at home. Lady Death plays a melody that my blood finds hard to ignore for long. Amidst the chaos that was my life, I surveyed the destruction that had consumed what was left of my family. My brother Angel was in jail on gun charges and facing federal time, his absence creating a huge power vacuum, not only in the family but in the city as a whole. My dear mother, who once in my life persuaded me to forgive the adulterous woman who became my wife, herself showed her courtesan qualities by revealing that my elder brother, the most honest of us all, was only my half-brother. This news almost destroyed my father. I left an empty house and a job in Arizona to head into Death Valley with a smile and an invitation from an old acquaintance, Officer Sandoval. But it was she who worried me most, Cecilia. "Who's there?" A voice answered loudly to the triple doorbell I made. It was a habit since childhood to press the bell 3 times for no particular reason. "Damn it, wait," the voice continued. "Officer Sandoval," I greeted the man as he opened the door. He was still partially dressed in his uniform, except for the shirt he had taken off long ago. His uniform trousers and stained t-shirt showed how much time he spent at work. Long delays in hiring and strict selection rules made his profession one of the most difficult to enter. Picking up the box of beer, I continued, "I just decided to see if you wanted to have a couple of bottles." "D," he happily shook my hand. "I was expecting you a couple of days ago, but I can imagine that you had things to do with your family." He motioned for me to come in and led me to the kitchen. "You can put the beer in the refrigerator. Are you still a heavy smoker?" I nodded, putting the beer in the refrigerator and taking out 2 bottles. "Okay, let's go out into the backyard and talk there." "You have a beautiful house, Officer Sandoval," I said, telling the absolute truth. His house was just outside the city limits, far enough away to escape the city smells, smog and human sweat that permeated every inch of the city. Even the gross smell of oil and burning garbage seemed to avoid the area. The sounds of traffic were barely heard in the background and were drowned out by the chirping of birds and the laughter of children. "Nothing special, D," he answered happily. "I knew I wanted to stay here and do whatever I could to support this community. My life may not be all that adventurous, but it is the life I was destined for. Understand?" "No," I replied, taking a sip of a cold Pacifico. "I honestly can't say I understand. I have spent my entire adult life working for the government in one capacity or another to atone for the mistakes of my youth. You knew me in the wild, reckless days of my youth. In truth, the only reason I can move from place to place so quickly is because there is nothing keeping me in any particular place." "I can't imagine such a life," Sandoval replied regretfully. "So tell me, is your brother's arrest the only reason you decided to return home?" "I wanted to visit him," I replied, "but I had other family matters to take care of. You know how it is. A long absence can cause unexpected complications." "I can imagine," Sandoval replied, taking a sip of his beer. "Look, I'm really sorry about your brother. I can't imagine your family having a good time in this situation. Well, it's difficult for my parents to cope with this situation, but they can handle it, I'm sure," I replied, and paranoia began to appear. I looked at this man carefully. Suspicion began to take hold of me. There was something strange in his questions, but I decided to ignore it for now. "Your family has always been known for its good reputation in this community," he continued. "Such an event, of course, would be a shock." His empty gaze stared into my eyes. "But I'm sure you'll do everything you can to help your family." Before I could answer, another voice interrupted our conversation. "I'm home, honey," a woman's voice said. "Oh, I didn't know you had guests, dear." "Ma'am," I said, instantly getting up from my chair. She was older. In appearance, she was already over 40, but somehow she remained surprisingly beautiful and attractive. Truly, she was the embodiment of the expression, "A woman is like fine wine, getting better with age," and she became even more desirable in her mature years. "Honey," Sandoval responded immediately, "don't worry, just an old friend stopping by for a quick drink and a little chat." He went to hug his wife. Her sudden surprise convinced me that this was not his usual reaction to her arrival. "I hope I'm not in the way," she replied, looking at my face, trying to figure out where she could have seen me before. The years have changed my features. I had grown out my beard and shaved my head to hide many of my features, and the way I spoke was now significantly different from the way I spoke many years ago. "Don't worry, ma'am," I interrupted Sandoval. "Please join us. We're not discussing anything particularly important, and I'm sure you're having a hard time trying to figure out where you've seen me before." "Forgive me for being rude," she apologized, blushing slightly, "but you do seem very familiar to me. Where have we met before?" "Honey," Sandoval said, "this is Dee." "No," her surprise was impossible to hide. She covered her mouth with her hand, took a step back, and her breathing quickened in complete shock at the realization. "Is this really the same?" "I'm afraid so, ma'am," I replied, smiling sheepishly, "but I assure you, I've matured a lot since I left this town." "Honey," Sandoval interrupted, "Dee just returned after many years abroad. He shed his blood for this country, left as a young ruffian, and returned as a true hero." He was almost beaming with pride as he finished his speech. "He became a damn good man." "That explains a lot," she said, sitting down next to me, "but I see that something hasn't changed. Still single. There's something about military men that makes them unable to keep a woman." "Well," I replied with a slight smile, "I was married once, ma'am, but it seems that what I could give her wasn't enough." I took a sip of beer. "I'm sorry to hear that, Dee." Her embarrassment was obvious. "Where is she now?" "I'm sure she's busy raising the child she had while married to me with her new husband," I replied. The years have erased the anger from my voice when I speak on this topic. I was happy for Anne, although I had not heard from or spoken to her for many years. I really hoped that she was as happy as she could be in her life. "Oh my God," she continued, covering her mouth in shock. "I'm so sorry, Dee." "Honey," Sandoval interjected, "could you leave us for a few minutes while we chat?" "Of course," she replied, gladly taking the opportunity to escape the awkward conversation. "I need to relieve myself of the stress of the day. I'll leave you boys alone." She walked over and kissed her husband as she walked into the house. I couldn't help but look at her body. As I said, even in her mature years, her beauty has not faded at all. She had a beautifully toned body, and even her thighs showed years of good time in the gym. "Sorry about that, Dee," Sandoval interrupted my bashful reverie. "She often says whatever comes into her head without much filter." "No need to apologize." I waved his apology away with my hand. "There's no way she could have known about my life. I understand that I'm so old now that my peers have been living a family life for many years. To tell the truth, I envy some of them." I stood up and stretched, and a loud crunching sound reminded me of the many injuries I had accumulated over the years. If things had worked out differently, I'm sure I'd still be a happily married man with several kids right now. "I can't believe what I'm hearing," Sandoval said. "Do you really regret the way your life turned out? All these crazy adventures you had?" He took his bottle with caution. He said much more than he wanted, and his hesitation made everything clear to me at that moment. "Not at all, Officer Sandoval," I said, slowly picking up my phone. I easily found the application I needed. I always kept the apps on my phone in alphabetical order. Activating it, I held the phone up to Sandoval, who was still looking at me silently as I moved. He thought that I was trying to show him something on the phone. The fool leaned closer to the phone. The steady buzz of the phone made me feel sad. Of all the things I have done, I can at least say that I have never betrayed those I considered close. "What?" I raised one finger to silence him, then pointed my hand at his chest. Realization dawned on him. At least he had the decency to hang his head in shame when he realized he had been exposed. "Should we expect your police buddies to break into this house now? Or have you been unable to obtain anything that could be used against me, officer?" Contempt and anger oozed from every syllable, the sound of my phone case closing, snapping him out of the depression hanging over his head. His hand went to his empty thigh, and I shook my head. "I see, so you were just trying to build a case for. Who, dare I ask?" "FBI," he replied, his hand returning to the table as more shame washed over him. "No one is going to break into the house. They approached me some time ago when your brother was brought in. Our story made them think that there might be some connection between us, and they asked me if I knew anything about your brother's activities. After your visit, he was transferred from the district and placed in another institution. Are you involved in this?" "No, D," he answered quickly. "I swear. After your visit, they showed up again, and I told them that you were back in town. They asked me if I would meet with you, and then they said that they would need to get some information from you. D, I work in law enforcement, and when they asked me for assistance, I could not refuse. We had a meeting with several people, agents from different agencies, and they knew that with your training, it is almost impossible for anyone to follow you, not to mention bugging your phone or blackmailing you." He took a long sip of his beer before continuing. "They asked me if you posed any danger to me or my family. When I said no, they asked me to wear a bug and try to get you to say something, which could give them insight into your family's affairs. D, the level of violence in this area has increased dramatically in recent years, and with your brother's arrest, it looks like things will only get worse. So yes, I betrayed your trust, but I did. It's for the right reasons. It's my community, the people who are dying. On my streets, my friends and acquaintances." I looked into the distance behind him. His words made sense. This man whose life I once saved had just betrayed me for the promise of better days ahead. A noble dream, but still nothing more than a dream. These last years have shown me how dangerous it is to be a dreamer in the world of reality. Why are so many federal agencies interested in arresting my brother? "I don't know more than what I've already said," he replied. The circumstances surrounding your brother's arrest are suspicious. He has always been a very smart man. The case against him is so impeccable that it arouses suspicion among everyone involved. The huge amount of weapons, the trafficking charges immediately increased. This in itself attracted the attention of the feds. We all know that your family is not the most trustworthy, but we also know that you care about the community. The wars here are getting worse, and this has also attracted even more attention from the feds. So, you had to make me confess to something specific. The anger in my voice betrayed the usual control that I maintained. This situation hurt me much more than I thought. No, he begged. I just needed to get information about what your family is planning or what you know about your brother's arrest. Tell your FBI friends to stay away from me, I replied. I'm here to take care of my family and nothing more. I served my country honorably, bled and cried for this flag, and sacrificed more than my share to keep the wheels of this machine moving. I looked at Sandoval so that his microphone could clearly record my next statement. But if I feel even one unusual look on me, I will give them a reason to watch my every move under a microscope. I will give them such a war that current events will seem childish. Game. I took my things and headed towards the door. The female figure standing there holding 3 cold bottles of beer in her hands made me stop for a second. Darling, Sandoval tried to get up, but her voice froze him in place. What have you done? She looked at him with a strange mixture of pain and humiliation. Dee, I'm so sorry, please. She looked at me as I extended my hand towards the 3 bottles. Have a nice evening, ma'am, I said as I walked past her. I'm sure you'll understand if we don't see each other again. It was really nice meeting you. As I closed their front door behind me, I heard her screaming at her husband. Sandoval was right. A lot has changed. I placed 3 bottles on the seat next to me and started up the engine of my dad's beautifully maintained truck. The roar of the engine was not overly loud, but it gave away the power under the hood. The road to my next destination was not long, but with my thoughts weighed down by the latest revelations, it seemed long and, more importantly, lonely. I left a few friends in this city and have already begun to lose even them. I kept an eye on the rear mirror, looking for any sign that I was being followed. Once I was sure that no one was following me, a familiar entrance appeared. The house was built by my great-grandfather when he started the family business, and even by today's standards was considered eccentric. It was a 2-story house with a more spacious lower floor, almost like a castle. All 6 bedrooms were on the 2nd floor, and the lower floor contained numerous offices and a living room where all family gatherings took place. With the advancement of technology, the home was constantly undergoing upgrades. A 10-foot stone wall surrounded the house, with 2 entrances providing access to the grounds. Cameras and patrolling guards maintained security. We are not accepting guests now, said a young man standing at the main gate when I stopped the truck at the guardhouse. So turn around and go back to where you came from. I'm not selling anything, I replied, irritation quickly replacing all previous emotions. Absorbed in the newspaper, which absorbed all his attention, the young man continued. What are you, a reporter? He stood up and walked to the driver's side window. The fool didn't even bother to check that I was holding a weapon before approaching the window. Or a cop. Do you think I look like a cop? Do you see the notebook in my hands? Then what the hell do you want? He put his hand on the handle of the weapon, which was attached to his right thigh. The small 9mm Beretta gave him a false sense of courage. Just open the gate, I said, looking at the young impudent man. His hand clenched the weapon in preparation to remove it from its holster. I put the truck in park and took my foot off the brake as he raised his weapon. Do you even know where you are, you stupid idiot? He took a step closer to the window, finger on the trigger and an unstable base. I almost smiled at how stupid he was. Security training has deteriorated greatly. I grabbed the steering wheel tightly with both hands, keeping my breathing even as he walked towards the window. As soon as his weapon passed through the truck window, I made my move. With my right hand, I pinned his gun hand to the roof of the truck, applying just the right amount of pressure on his wrist to get his gun hand to release. As his brain registered the attack, my left hand reached for the door handle, and I pushed it hard with my left foot. The second knock on the door silenced him. The third blow, and his eyes rolled back and darkness swallowed him. I walked up to the security booth and pressed the button to open the gate, while unloading the weapon he had so recklessly lost. I drove my truck through the gate before it closed and parked the car before anyone noticed me. I took 3 bottles from the seat and leaned against the back of the truck, opening the first bottle while I waited for the meeting committee. 2 minutes, I said as 6 heavily armed men approached, guns drawn. They moved uncoordinated, completely unorganized, but at least they were moving towards the same person. I told them this. "You should put your hands up, moron," one of the men said. He was the only one who had a perfect base and a good shooting stance. "Slowly, and tell me what kind of death you are looking for, appearing here like this." "I came to see your boss," I replied, taking a sip of the beer in my hand. It was almost gone. I slowly drank the last of the liquid in the bottle before casually tossing it onto the back of the truck. Moving slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes, all the while keeping my eyes on the only person who seemed prepared. "I don't remember your name in the appointment book," he grinned. "I don't remember any of you idiots asking my name," I smiled, popping the cap of the second bottle and taking a long, satisfying sip. The beer was losing its coolness in the hot sun, and after a loud belch, I took another long sip, almost emptying the second bottle. "I have to admit," the same man continued, "you are brave. What do you want?" "I need to see your boss," I replied, deliberately remaining calm in this situation. "Now, either you come inside with me," I continued, "or I'll sit here, finish the last beer, and then come in myself." I pulled back the hem of my coat so they could see the gun at my side, the ever-present .40 Smith & Wesson. A few bullets lighter, but still one. "Your move, gentlemen." "There are 6 of us." One of the men began before being interrupted by the one who actually impressed me. Without saying a word or making a single move, he silently ordered the man who was trying to speak to contact someone on the radio. "Good choice," I chuckled, throwing the second empty bottle into the back of the truck and reaching for the third. "Well, you can't leave good beer, right?" I raised the bottle in his direction when suddenly the second man interrupted him again. "He's still entertaining his guest," the man answered uncertainly. "Well then," I laughed, "it's a great time, isn't it?" I walked past the surprised men to the big door. A few years ago, the family installed a coded security panel to prevent unauthorized entry into this particular area of the house. As I entered the code, I noticed surprise on the faces of the men who followed me. "Some things never change," I said as the lock opened and the door slowly opened. "Who are you?" said the first man when I entered the house. The layout of the living room had not changed in recent years. Even the small stains on the walls from children's drawings almost made it feel like home. I smiled at him, a smile that I'm sure looked like a schoolboy's. I pointed to the hallway just off the main staircase. "This way, I think." I knew where the corridor led. It was the room at the end where I sat next to my brother many times, listening to my uncle teach us about the family business. As I continued walking, they all followed me. I looked at the familiar photographs hanging on the walls. Everyone from our family, how we all grew up. Generations smiled at us as we walked down the corridor, and before we reached the door, I heard sounds of passionate amusement that prevented my cousin from going out to see a visitor. "Maybe we should," began the radio man. Using my body weight and leg strength accumulated over the years on countless battlefields, I easily knocked down the door. The crunch of breaking wood prevented him from finishing his sentence, but it wasn't loud enough to stop the performance before us. My cousin Jose stood in front of us, with his pants down and beads of sweat on his face. His loud moans sounded like he was about to collapse and faint. "Knock, knock," I said as the door slammed against the wall, and the sound of my voice finally broke the cocoon of bliss that had apparently engulfed them. When they realized who was in front of them, his concentration was broken. His reaction was comical, but the obvious fear on her face said more about me than the name Jose said. "Demon," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What? What? Get yourself in order. I looked at the girl. Contempt and hatred pierced every time I looked at her. And get out. I turned to my cousin. My voice didn't waver. Pull up your pants and clean yourself up. Jesus Christ, you look like a bully. I walked to the wall and used the switch to turn on the large ceiling fan to clear the room of the smell that threatened to permeate my clothes. You should have called, Jose said, confidence creeping back into his voice as he looked at me smugly. His confidence was based on the fact that the 6 guards who had followed me were still in the room. I could. Get the bitch out of here. I turned to the 2 guards, who could hardly take their eyes off the woman. Give her your jacket so she can cover herself. Without hesitation, one of the men took off his jacket and handed it to her. Her gratitude remained mute as she put it on to retain at least some dignity and pride. Again, I reached into my pocket and took out a pack of cigarettes I needed to further mask the smell in the room. If there is nothing else, said the man who impressed me, breaking the awkward silence that threatened to hang over the room, we will return to our positions. What is your name? I looked at him. Which unit? Francisco, he replied. Us Marine Corps. 10 years, 5 deployments. Semper Fi, devil dog, I said, nodding to him. My brother hired you. Yes, sir. What is your position? Just a security guard, he replied, getting ready to leave. Who is the chief security officer? I asked, and before he could answer, I raised my hand. It doesn't matter. Bring him here. Quickly. Sir, he said, and the rest of the guards rushed out of the room, confused by our short conversation. Who was that bitch? I asked my cousin, left alone with him, the sounds of retreating footsteps fading around us. She seemed familiar to me. Eh? Jose was still stunned by the sudden departure of his guards. Oh yeah, it was Jessica. She went to school with you. Heard my dad say you had a thing for her in those days. No, I replied. Although I was physically attracted to her, and my body certainly lusted after her, I didn't want anything more from her. And after I saw her a few minutes ago, all desire for her completely disappeared. I thought she married some football player. Yes, he replied, lighting his own cigarette. She came back a couple of months ago with the baby. I helped her get back on her feet. He caught himself as the words came out of his mouth. Of course, I replied. Don't bring her here anymore. If you want to have her as a bad girl, hire a number for that. Before he could answer, Francisco returned with another man behind him. Who are you? I'm the head of security, the man answered. My name is. 2 minutes, I looked into his eyes, peering into his weak soul as I spoke. It took your guards 2 minutes to notice that I had already bypassed the only guard left at the gate, the only guard I disarmed and knocked out in a matter of seconds. He tried to mutter excuses, but the words couldn't form. Not to mention the lousy training of the so-called guards who were supposed to protect the interior, with one exception. I looked at Francisco as I said the last words. But, sir. In an instant, I pulled out my gun and held it an inch from the center of his head. Jose jumped back. Francisco remained in place, not taking his eyes off me. The smell of urine helped mask the stench of my cousin's fluids. Francisco, my hand remained motionless as I spoke. Congratulations. You are the new head of security. Make sure our new recruit has a clean uniform. Check supplies, equipment, weapons, and people. Make adjustments as you see fit. I looked at my former boss. Do we have problems with this? He shook his head, not taking his eyes off the barrel of my gun. Great. 3 hours. I lowered the weapon and holstered it as the man took a deep breath. Wait. Jose began to stutter. What are you doing? The head of the family, my brother, is currently in federal custody. My eyes pierced his, my voice growing louder as I continued. The family home is poorly protected. There is almost no one from the family here. I took a step towards him, and he began to retreat. The self-proclaimed leader of the family is too busy having sex with his bitches in the main office, where all family matters are discussed, to greet a visitor, or even to respond to a serious security breach. He began to cower as I closed the distance between us. I could smell the smoke on his breath, and holding back my rage, I finished. "Little cousin, I'm cleaning up your fucking dirt." "But you left," he muttered. "Here I am," I replied, heading towards the large leather chair that perfectly complemented the massive table. "If my family didn't need my help, I wouldn't be here. Tell me what situation we are in, little cousin. We have 3 hours to think." We talked all this time, sitting opposite each other. I mostly asked questions about the various family businesses I remembered and listened to his news. My brother had been in jail for months before I returned to town. Angel's appearance was starting to make sense. During this time, my cousin almost managed to destroy every business, which cost the family a lot of money. Your brother was trying to expand his business into the arms market. Jose began to explain the reason for my brother's arrest. It was after his second or third big purchase that he got arrested. The only details I was able to find out were that there was a shootout between Angel and the former head of security against the arms dealers, right when the feds showed up. At least Angel was smart enough not to point his gun at the feds, but they already had everything they needed. "Who were they trying to catch?" I asked, intending to ask this question to myself, trying to piece the whole picture together. Jose looked at me in confusion. "The feds. They were there because someone told them about a deal that was going on. But they arrived only after the shooting started," Jose clarified, and I saw the gears begin to turn in his head. He may have been putting the same puzzle pieces together, or perhaps he was trying to figure out what I was thinking. "You're right," I replied. "Well, it's a pity that we don't have people to ask about this, right?" I smiled at him, and his face twisted into a strange grimace. Was it fear? Francisco's return interrupted our conversation. "Security is in place," Francisco said, looking at me. "All equipment is secure. I have compiled a list of additional guards that we will need to fill gaps in shifts, as well as to replace those who are completely incompetent." He handed me a piece of paper, then continued. "In addition, I have some ideas for additional training so that all fighters are on the same level." "Prepare a plan," I replied without taking the sheet. "Appoint as many leaders as you think necessary, and do it. Did you know the former chief of security?" "Yes," Francisco said, his face frowning and showing sadness. "It was my brother." I put my hand on his shoulder and turned him to face me. "I'm sorry," I said as tears filled his eyes. "Tell me about him." I sat him down on one of the chairs and went to the drinks cabinet myself and poured 2 glasses. "He was 6 years older than me," Francisco began. "Joined the Marines right out of high school. I followed him when I graduated. It was his last station when he met your brother. They hit it off right away, and your brother offered him a job. When I finished my contract, he asked me to come here and work for your brother. On my first day on the job, my brother told me that I'll start from the bottom. Any dirty work is mine by default." "As it should be," I replied, causing Francisco to smile. "He was there with your brother," he said with pride in his voice. "He would follow the angel to hell without any questions." "You can't expect more from a Marine," I replied, extending my hand to him. "I only hope that I can inspire the same devotion. Is there another family?" "My daughter-in-law," he replied. "I tried to take care of her as best I could." "What do you mean?" I asked, glancing again at Jose, in whom a new anger was kindled. "Well," he continued, "without my brother's income, it was difficult for her to make ends meet. She had to move into a squalid apartment to survive without my help. She flatly refused any money because I already sent most of my salary to my parents." "I see," Jose cowered under my gaze, which seemed to burn right through him. "Francisco, have you ever heard of the expression ordo ad fratres faciendum?" When he shook his head, I continued, looking at my cousin, "Don't worry, it's part of the old Sicilian tradition. You don't have to worry about it, my friend." I approached my cousin, who wisely retreated as far as he could. "Does anything else need to be done?" Francisco asked, clearly not understanding why my cousin was moving so strangely. "Yes," I replied. "Actually, it is necessary. My dear cousin has guards assigned to him as the temporary head of the family, right? He nodded. How many guards? 6, Francisco answered. How many guards does his dear wife have? I asked. Jose had long lost his complexion, but somehow he became even paler. Francisco replied. None, sir. Neither do your parents, Jose said, trying to justify his inability to care for his dear wife. You're right, I replied. So your wife carries a weapon and knows how to use it, just like my father, and I assume that your house is now surrounded by a large wall, like theirs, right? Jose remained silent. Francisco, gather a few guys so that we can make sure that my beloved cousin's wife is well protected, and she will move here. Yes, sir. Besides, I continued, you will have 6 extra hands to distribute as you please. My cousin is right, his house is perfectly protected, so he does not need his personal guard while he remains there. Wait. Jose began to protest, but one of my fingers made it clear that finishing the sentence would be a mistake. I'm sure Edith will sleep better under guard, I continued. And with that little show you had with Jessica a few hours ago, I'm sure you haven't been home in a few days. Yes, sir, Francisco smiled as he left the office. My gaze threatened my cousin not to continue protesting. Get the whole family, I said, heading back to the chair. Don't tell them I'm back in town. Just tell them you're having a family meeting tomorrow at noon. Call your wife and tell her we'll visit her tonight. I could use a nice home-cooked dinner. As he started to leave the office, I added, You broke this family's oath, little cousin. He stopped when he heard my words. Blood was shed in our defense, and you ignored it. I will not forget this. D, a small body rushed towards me. The smell of her perfume was as intoxicating as it had been many years ago. Edith was beautiful, just over 5 feet tall, with long brown hair. Her small, almond-shaped eyes gave a hint of Asian heritage, and her skin was always bronzed, like that of a woman whose tan others would pay top dollar for. The sound of her voice could outshine the choir of angels. My love, I replied, hugging her. It's been too long since I held you in my arms. Enough, you seducer, she playfully hit me on the chest. What are you doing in the city? How long have you been here? Not for long, and I came because of the angel, I answered. I hope you have prepared enough food and can get ready quickly. He told me everything, she replied, and her voice suddenly became harsh. Most things are already ready. Did you really kick him out of the house? She leaned towards me, whispering the question directly into my ear. Yes, I replied. I needed him to get out of here if I was going to get this straight. So you're back? She meant much more than just my arrival at the house. I asked myself the same question. I returned to my role with ease, almost as if by instinct. I tried to convince myself that I was doing this because my father asked me to, because my brother needed me, because... What else? I'm not sure, I answered honestly. One of the doctors I consulted told me that the only way to achieve any closure was to let go of what wasn't helping me, what was holding me back. I remembered Dr. Cargill's words long before Barbara decided to ruin my life in her own way. Well, Edith tried to defuse the situation. I prepared all your favorite dishes, and a lot of them. Everything I take with me is in the room, she told the 2 men who came with us. Would you like a drink? I will, I replied. They are at work. As soon as we entered the house, they immediately headed into the room. I'll drink too, Jose added. Pour it yourself, Edith answered sharply. Sit down, she ordered me, pointing to one of the sofas. The food will be ready now. As soon as the guards finished loading her things into the car, they helped themselves to food on their plates. If you drop even 1 grain of rice, you will clean the whole house, understand. It was comical to see how the almost 2-meter thug runs for napkins with fear on his face. Have you finished your degree? I asked her as she put away the used dishes. Or was she too busy playing housewife? I'm finished, she answered dryly to my perhaps harsh question. True, there is no particular point in this. Take your textbooks, I suggested. Brush up on your knowledge, and if you need to take courses to update, let me know. Is there a plan? She smiled and wrapped her arms around my neck again, pulling my face in for a quick kiss. Or is this a cunning way to convince me to live with you? Because, I don't need much convincing when it comes to you. While Jose stood open-mouthed at our open display of affection, we left the house hand in hand. The journey home was not long, but Edith fell asleep on my shoulder before we arrived. I carried her into the house. Francisco did an excellent job reorganizing the security around the house. I carefully laid her down in one of the rooms and made sure the guards placed her things without disturbing her sleep. I decided to stay in the house for the night. Once again, Francisco impressed me. He prepared a room for me before he left. Not for the last time, I felt it was right to give him the position that his brother had previously held. The next morning, I woke up early as usual, before the sun rose. I opened the door to my room and decided to use the gym in the house. I haven't felt so relaxed in a long time. Francisco was already busy with his work. I heard him shout orders and instructions to his men as he led them in coordinated training. I knew that the purpose of such activities was to develop a sense of teamwork and discipline, which the group clearly lacked. After finishing my workout, I walked up to him, ready to give me the morning report. "Sir," he began, "it will take time, but I really believe these guys have what it takes to work together as a unit." He was beaming with pride. "I also made sure to arrange your family meeting for this afternoon. However, I must say, you think no one will listen to Jose," I finished for him. "That's the whole point, my friend. I need to understand who is loyal to him and who remains loyal to my brother. Make sure to gather all family members at 11 o'clock in the afternoon. Only then will we inform them that I have returned." "Very well, sir," he replied as we approached the door. Before I could enter the last digits into the combination lock, Francisco continued. "One more thing," he said. As soon as I turned towards him, I was swept off my feet by a pair of loving arms that wrapped around me tightly before gravity even kicked in. "She asked me to distract you long enough to do this." "Traitor," I replied, rising to my feet. Edith smiled, greeting me as soon as I stood up. "I see you slept well." "I've already prepared breakfast," she said. "Hurry up before it cools down." She turned around and walked into the house, and I followed her. "Since you've decided to set me up," I said to Francisco, who had already begun to leave, "then you can join us." "Damn," he said, taking a $20 bill from his pocket, which he immediately handed to a smiling Edith. "What did I miss?" I asked when we reached the kitchen. Edith prepared a sumptuous breakfast, a large bowl of scrambled eggs, bacon, homemade buns, orange juice, coffee, and sweet pastries. It was more than I expected, and my hungry stomach looked forward with joy to the future pleasure. "Francisco bet you're too arrogant to eat with the servants," she replied, filling my plate and handing it to me. "You are not a servant," I told Francisco. "You are a great help, but you are not inferior to me. You are not inferior to anyone, do you understand me? Has my brother ever looked down on you?" "No, sir," he replied humbly. "I didn't look." "Then don't expect me to," I said. "Now sit down." As Edith handed him a plate of food, I continued, "Tell me what you saw about my family." "Sir," he began, "I have, of course, never met you before, but I have heard a lot about you from your brother. We often talked to him late at night about you. He closely followed your career abroad." This came as a surprise to me, but I did not interrupt him as he continued his story. "About a year ago, things started to go bad. More and more businesses began to lose money. Murders began to occur in protected areas. Girls of easy virtue began to appear in the districts." He looked at Edith. "I beg your pardon, ma'am." "I've heard worse," she laughed, taking a large bite of her toast. "Your brother received a call about a new supplier who was selling weapons at very low prices. He took a bite from his breakfast before continuing his story. I offered to pick up the shipment, but he categorically refused. Instead, he sent me to your parents with a handful of people." Edith chimed in. "Do you know who it could be?" "Well, ma'am," he continued, My understanding is that whoever did this must have had extensive knowledge of how we operate. Also, if my brother had suspected a trap, he would have gone himself. My brother would know that they know where my parents live, I added. That's why he sent his most trusted man to keep an eye on them. Yes, sir, he replied, continuing to eat. For a long time, only the sounds of our cutlery broke the silence in the room, all three of us thinking about the same thing. Do you think this is my husband? Edith grabbed my hand, asking her a question. Francisco looked at me for a second before looking back to his plate. As always, my dear, I kissed her forehead. Your food was wonderful. Thank you very much. Francisco and I need to check on the guys. Thank you for the food, ma'am, he said as we both stood up. Make sure you're ready for noon, I told Edith as we walked outside. Today there will be a small meeting. Call my godmother, she still has a catering business, let her do the cooking. I'd rather have you next to me. She smiled and blushed slightly as Francisco and I walked out of the kitchen. She's a wonderful woman, he said as soon as we left. Don't let her looks fool you, I replied. She is one of the most loving women I have ever met in my life. But she is also one of the most dangerous and ruthless people I know. She loves as much as she hates. So your cousin? Yes, I laughed. He's almost definitely done for. Frankly, I'm surprised he still has his rightful place. Little cousin, I greeted Jose as Francisco and I returned from checking security. All the guys were in good spirits, noble, respectful, and, most importantly, afraid of my reputation. Francisco was an excellent leader. He knew everyone by name and often knew personal details of their lives, the names of their children, wives, and even reminded one of the men about the anniversary, ordering him to buy flowers for his wife. To say that I was impressed is to say nothing. Jose held a small folder with handwritten information. I realized that it was a list of accounts and passwords for many sites and programs. Are these all the numbers? I asked, taking the folder from his hands and handing it to Francisco. Take this to Edith. I think she understands accounting and can put this data in order. Yes, sir. He stood up and walked past Jose without even looking at him. You could have just asked me, Jose said. I could explain everything to you. Don't bother yourself, I replied. We have assistants for such matters. I hoped that these words would seem familiar to him, but if he understood, he did not show it. Is the whole family already in the dining room? I asked, just as the clock struck noon. We walked together, and Francisco stood like a guard at the door to the dining room. I sent out a message, Jose replied, but nobody listened to you. I interrupted him, opening the door. As expected, the table was empty. No one wanted to appear at his request. Francisco? Yes, sir, he replied. Gentlemen, please. He said this into the walkie-talkie, and all three of us took our places at the dinner table. Jose almost lost his composure when he saw Francisco sit down to my left. Why is he here? His voice was full of contempt. He should be outside, keeping an eye on. He's exactly where he should be, I interrupted, taking a pack of cigarettes from my pocket. I offered one to Francisco and took one for myself. He lit both cigarettes with his lighter before I continued. Tell me more about the day my brother was arrested, little cousin. You know as much as I do, I'm sure, he muttered. I'm sure that bitch I called my wife told you everything last night. I backhanded him, knocking the taste out of his mouth. I told you, little cousin, no more bitches in this house, and I also told you to at least pretend that you respect your wife. As he rubbed his face, his eyes filled with tears. All calls done, sir, Francisco interrupted after the small voice on the radio confirmed his words. I suggest we go outside. Lead the way, little cousin, I said. We had a little picnic in the backyard. I'll join you later. Francisco stood up and directed Jose outside. Oh, I almost forgot, Francisco. Yes, sir, he said, pushing nose against the wall in one swift motion. Years of accumulated anger were poured into that single blow, and Jose's forehead hit the concrete with a thud. The next second, he spread his legs and began to search his body. This time, Jose had a small pistol hidden in the small of his back. I was impressed for a moment until I got a closer look at the weapon. "Everything is clear, sir." "What the hell was that?" Jose shouted, trying to regain his balance and composure. "Make sure you're not carrying wires or weapons," I laughed, holding up a small Derringer pistol. "You know, they call them handbag guns." "Yes, it's a .45 caliber, but with one cartridge. Come on, little cousin." "This way," Francisco said, leading the way again, the smile never leaving his face. I knew he took great pleasure in doing this to my cousin. "Sir, the guests will arrive in 45 minutes. Do you need anything before then?" "No," I replied. "Continue. I won't stay long." "Didn't you have enough last night?" Jose grinned, but my look made him understand that it was a mistake. Before I could take a step, he was already hurrying towards the backyard. Both Francisco and I shook our heads at such cowardly behavior and laughed. After a painful climb up the stairs, I knocked softly on her door. "Are you ready?" "Almost," Edith replied through the door. "Is it already time?" "Yes," I replied. "The show is about to start, but there's no way without the second main character," I teased. "So hurry up. Come on, honey. Francisco will tell you where to be." People gathered in the courtyard, drowned in a sea of whispers and quiet conversations. Chaotic waves of movement brought another smile to my face. As soon as I stepped into the light, the voices immediately stopped. I turned around and saw my cousin, who was already sitting in his seat, as I had ordered. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice came over the loudspeaker, "please take your seats." "As you know," I began, sitting down at the main table. This table was set on a small platform raised several inches above the ground, giving the appearance that the most important members of the family were sitting at it. After this meeting, it will be so. As you know, Angel is in prison. As soon as I spoke, the guards began approaching the tables in twos, each pair guarding the head of each table. The nervousness among the family members present was palpable. The fact that Jose had no security made the rest of the family, especially himself, think that they were about to be punished for the insult. Until he is released or killed, I will act on his behalf as the head of the family. If anyone has any complaints or objections, now is the time to voice them. "Are you taking over for Jose?" one of my uncles asked with fear. I didn't expect this to be the first question. "No," I replied. "I am replacing my brother. My cousin will not be able to lead the family for reasons that I will explain shortly." "Why should we follow you?" someone else asked. The owner of the voice tried not to give himself away, but my guards immediately identified who said it. "You can leave and start your own organization," I replied. "You all know who I am. Some of you even know what I've been doing since I left. My reasons for leaving remain the same. I don't want anything to do with the dirty money this business brings in. This is a service for my family. I will be here as long as necessary." "How can we speak openly if we are surrounded by guards?" my other uncle said, looking straight at the guards standing behind him. "When have I not been a man of my word, uncle?" My painful expression silenced him. "If any of you feel threatened by the guards, all you have to do is ask them to leave." Two tables asked their guards to leave. It was these two tables that asked the most questions. Anyone else? The silence in the crowd gave me the answer. "Fine." The second item on the agenda is simple. Behind those tables at which the guards remained are now your guards. They will follow you everywhere, will give their lives if necessary to protect you. However, you will have to pay for their salaries and uniforms. I will provide them with weapons and training. The silence gave way to a murmur of approval from the families who had not sent their guards, and I continued. "Those who do not have guards will continue to go without guards, even without your private security. If I find out that you hired private security, I will take it as a personal insult and react accordingly." Several tables left without security began to protest. "I asked you to trust me, and you didn't. I will not tolerate discord in this family. The guards will report to my new head of security. I said as Francisco appeared and took a seat at my desk. He obeys only me. The third item on the agenda and the reason why Jose cannot lead this family on behalf of my brother. Now the family will have an accountant who will monitor our investments, assets, and capital. Let me introduce you to Edith. When she appeared, all mouths, including mine, dropped open. Edith chose a white summer dress that reached just above her knees. It was slightly form-fitting, skillfully highlighting her modest curves while still maintaining a sense of modesty. She put on a wide-brimmed hat to protect herself from the sun. Small heels completed her outfit. Once she sat down to my right at the table, I continued. Due to her new position, leaving my dear cousin as the head of the family would be a huge conflict of interest. From now on, any monetary investment must be approved by both her and me. I cannot approve purchases without her signature, and she cannot do so without my consent. A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. With all that said, ladies and gentlemen, I continued, a certain amount of money has disappeared. At the suggestion of both my security chief and my accountant, I am declaring an amnesty for 1 week. All unreported debts, unreported investments, and unlisted assets must be declared and no questions will be asked. Anything not declared or paid within the next week will be considered an attempt to defraud the family and will be punished accordingly. Several people gulped. 1 week of amnesty. Until all funds are accounted for, family accounts will be frozen. Within 90 days, I will find out who tried to deceive the family and who didn't. I strongly recommend taking advantage of the amnesty week. Don't forget one more thing, honey, Edith said, taking my hand in a loving gesture. She wrapped her arm around mine, making it clear that she intended to declare herself my equal, and if I had not known better, I would have thought that she was announcing to all the women present that she was laying claim to me. Oh yes, thank you, dear, I replied. Someone here, perhaps more than one person, has valuable information about how and why my brother was framed. Amnesty Week extends to this aspect as well. Confess now or pray that I don't find you. People began to look at each other with suspicion. And believe me, I will find you. I allowed a few seconds of silence to heighten the sense of uncertainty in everyone sitting in front of me. Now, I interrupted the growing suspicion in the crowd. I could already see which of them were snakes trying to hide in the grass. Let's do without the unpleasant news. Enjoy your meal, relax. This is a family gathering after all. As everyone began to move towards the large tables decorated with a variety of food, I stopped Edith as she tried to stand up. Where are you going? I want to bring you a plate of food. There was a surprise in her voice. Not today, baby, I said, kissing her cheek. You look great, beautiful. The gods must be jealous of you at this very moment. Today, you just enjoy it. I love taking care of you, Dee. And you're great at it, but today let me take care of you. She blushed. I have something special for you. Present, her smile was like that of a child. Two, actually, I said, pointing to the door as Jessica walked into the yard. Edith's goodwill immediately changed to anger, which was ready to spill out like a lioness rushing at her prey. Wait, honey, you'll like this a lot more. I took her hand and led her to Hosea's table. Just behave, please. Trust me, it's worth it. Okay, she said angrily, reminding me of a capricious child. I trust you. Jessica, I called happily as she turned to me. Her smile quickly disappeared when she saw who was standing next to me. Don't do this, I warned when she tried to move away. She froze in place. Come, I said, taking her hand and leading her to Hosea's table. When he saw us, he tried to run away, but realized that he had nowhere to go. He was cornered like an animal. Hi, Jessica, Jose said quietly. Long time no see. Shut your mouths, both of you, I said. This is what will happen. Jessica, you work for me now. Your new job. You are keeping an eye on the former, albeit temporary, head of the family. You shouldn't let anyone get close to him. If even one hair falls from his head, well, you don't want to know how long it takes for Lime to eat away human flesh, do you? Yes, Jessica answered quietly. Fine. If he makes any move towards you, I want to know about it immediately. If you take a step towards him, believe me, I will know right away too. Remember, no one should approach him except me and my security chief. If you fail this job, you will be destroyed. Understood? Yes, she answered quietly. Okay, I said. Go, report to Francisco. He will organize your training and give you a uniform. She immediately moved away. Little cousin, you now have a personal bodyguard. You should be thanking me. Thank you, he said with venom in his voice. I didn't want you to continue to feel insecure, I smiled. I know that this was a big concern for you. Edith and I walked away as soon as we were out of earshot. She laughed quietly. He will have to be near her all the time, but he won't be able to touch her. This is a wonderful gift, Dee. Thank you. And since she will be next to him all the time, he will not be able to have anyone else, my dear. Here's your second gift, I said when the food arrived at our table. Your favorite, lobster tails and scallops in butter lime sauce with roasted broccoli and baby corn. I knew this was her favorite dish for years. For the first time, I admitted that I knew it. I hope you like it, my dear. I kissed her cheek and tears ran down her cheeks. You are a wonderful, wonderful person. She kissed me on the lips. Thank you. You deserve it, I replied. Sit down and enjoy your dinner. I moved her STST so she could sit more comfortably. I have a feeling that the rats will come out of their holes, I whispered in her ear. Sir, Francisco interrupted. There is someone who wants to meet with you privately. I'm sorry, honey, I said to Edith. Let's go, my friend. I have a feeling I'm going to miss a lot of this party. Thank you for coming with this information, cousin, I said to the balding man sitting across from me. Cousin Armando was 15 years older than me, with a balding head and a growing belly. His father died when I was a baby, but my father often spoke well of him. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thanks, Damon, he replied. It was a shame what happened to Angel. That is why I temporarily left the organization. As soon as I heard you were back, I had to tell you that I support you. Of course, cousin, I stood up and shook his hand. I appreciate your trust and thank you for your support. As soon as he left, Francisco looked at me with concern. There is another person who wants to talk to you, sir, he said, but this man asked to meet only with you. Okay, I said, lighting another cigarette and pouring myself another drink. I began to regret not accepting Edith's offer to bring me a plate of food. Go and have a snack yourself. Make sure all the people eat. Sir, he nodded as he walked out of the office. As I massaged my temples, a light knock on the door interrupted my few seconds of respite. Before I could answer, the door opened and the goddess stood before me. I went to thank your godmother for making that dish for me, Edith said. I lost my breath and my brain stopped working for a second. Imagine my surprise when she said that she didn't cook it, but that you did it. She walked around the table, turned my chair around to face me, and sat on the table, crossing her legs seductively. Why did you do this for me? I wanted to, I replied. You deserve something good. It was the least I could do. She interrupted me with a kiss, her lips making me forget everything I wanted to say. Without further thought, I hugged her, pulling her onto my lap, without breaking the kiss. Even your cousin has never done anything like this for me, she said between kisses. I rarely eat this dish because it is difficult to prepare correctly, she continued, kissing me. Everything on that plate was delicious. I'm glad you liked it, I said, but someone came to me, and as much as I wanted to continue, business must come first. She pouted before standing up and smoothing out her dress before heading out of the office. We'll continue this conversation after the party, I said as she opened the door. Okay, Dee, she replied. But the numbers don't lie, she added, in order to maintain the appearance of discussing some matters. He is ready to receive you, Uncle. Dad, I said as a man entered the office. What are you doing here? I came to talk to the demon, not to my son, he replied. How can I help you, Uncle? I asked in an official tone. Even though he was my father, It was a common way to address the men of the previous generation in our family. In the family business, all men were called uncles or cousins, and those who lived to an advanced age were respectfully called grandfathers. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope with a very familiar stamp, a seal that I had seen several times many years ago and never thought I would see again. "It was left at my house, Demon," he said. "It was addressed to you. The agent who delivered him asked to convey a message. The king has returned. He said you'll understand what it means." "Thank you, uncle," I replied, and he headed towards the door. "I'll stay here for a while. 2 of my men will keep an eye on you." "This is not necessary," he said. "He was a very kind young man," answered the father. "Told me he made sure no one would bother us while I was delivering the letter. But I agree, it's better for you to stay here. There is a lot of work here, and this is the right place for the head of the family. It suits you, son." I opened the envelope and carefully read the message inside. After the 3rd reading, I was finally convinced that there was no mistake. I headed towards the party, which was almost ending. Few guests remained to bid me farewell. Little by little, people began to leave the house, ending the event. As the last guests began to leave the house, I looked at Francisco. "Bring Edith to the office. We need to discuss something." "Yes, sir. Everything is fine." His worried look was sincere. It was the look of a friend, not a subordinate. "It will be, my friend," I said. "I need food." "Your godmother saved some for you, sir," he replied. "I'll bring it to your office as soon as I find Edith." "Okay, thank you," I replied, thinking back to the last time I heard the phrase, "the king is back." There was only one person who used this expression, and I thought he died many years ago. The only person I've ever been afraid of, my friend Elvis. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to